In this tutorial, we are going to learn how to make a placket, a continuous placket, the type that you would use in the back of an heirloom dress. There's nothing more frustrating than working on a dress that you hope will become a special heirloom, only to discover that you have a nasty pleat on the back of your placket. So I'm going to share with you my method of making this placket that is easy. It's all done by machine, and with just a little bit of practice, you should be able to get a puckerless placket in no time. The first consideration when you are planning on your placket is to figure out how long to make the placket. If you are using the placket on a dress that has a dropped waistline, which means below the armhole, a 4 to 5 inch length for the placket should be sufficient. However, if you are using a dress that has a high yoke in the back, you want to ensure that the depth of your placket is going to be at least 2 inches, even up to 3 inches below the lowest edge of the arm side. Once you have determined the placket depth that you will be needing, go ahead and get your skirt fabric, find the center of the skirt, and you can fold it in half to get the exact center. You can even press a crease on this center section and then cut your slash right on the center, the depth that you have decided to use. Always plan to cut the length of your placket about an inch longer than what you need. It's always easier to trim off any extra rather than making it what you believe is exact, only to find out that you come up a 1/4 of an inch short as you're stitching. To determine the width of the placket, you need to know 2 things: the seam allowance and the button size. Your finished placket should always be the same width as the button. You can see in the example here, we have a dress with a 1/2 inch button, and the finished width of the placket is also 1/2 inch. Assuming that you will be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a 1/2 inch button, the width of your placket should be 1.5 inches. The last thing to remember is that your placket always should be cut on the lengthwise grain of the fabric. That way it matches the lengthwise grain of the skirt on your dress. The first thing that you want to do is open this slash up so that it's almost a straight line. You want to position this fabric on top so that you have this little V shape at the very lowest point of the slash. Then you're going to take your skirt and you're going to put the right side of the placket to the wrong side of the skirt fabric. I do it this way so that the entire thing can be stitched on the machine and no hand stitching will be required. Then you're going to adjust this piece so that as it comes down to the point here, you can see it's a little further away from the edge of the placket. When we stitch, we are going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you're going to use the edge of the fabric of the placket as the 1/4 inch guide, so that as you stitch down here, you're going to get closer to this cut section of the placket. Start stitching with a 2.0 stitch length, and just before you get to the very point of the fabric, drop your stitch length down to about a 1.0 and stitch with that shorter stitch length until you get past the V section, and then finish again with your 2.0. I thought it might be easier to show this technique using my contrast fabric samples. So this would be the right side of the skirt, and this would be the right side of the placket. So you would put the right side of the placket to the wrong side of the skirt, and here you would begin your stitching with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, shortening your stitch length here to a 1.0 as you go past this peak, continuing and then changing back to your 2.0 stitch length to finish this out. Once that's stitched, you want to open it up and press the seam allowance towards the placket. And on the opposite side, you want to do the same. You want to press in your 1/4 inch seam allowance. The next step would be to fold this over, and you want to fold it just past the stitching line. Then you're going to stitch right next to the edge of this fold on the placket piece, making sure that as you go down the line, you're covering up that initial stitching line so that you'll only see one stitching line on the outside here. So with your stitching line complete, the last step is to fold the placket on top of itself. So you've got your right side of your skirt, your placket is folded on top of itself, and you want to stitch across the bottom of the placket section here. I go back and forth a couple times just for strength. If you don't do that, this would be the stress point at the bottom of the placket. And with a child getting in and out of the dress multiple times, eventually you might end up with a little hole at the bottom of the placket here due to stress. By stitching your little seam across this corner here, what that does is it brings the stress line to this point. So if over continuous wear there's going to be a problem, it would get torn at this section. And that's an easy thing to remedy because you can just fold it back on top of itself, and you could go back and stitch this line slightly higher. So that's a good way to avoid any potential problems. So as you can see, you end up with a beautiful placket and no puckers at the bottom. And then the last step in this process would be to determine which way you want to button your garment. If you want it buttoning in this direction, you need to fold the placket back behind the skirt fabric this way, and then your buttons would be on this side. If you want it to button this way, obviously you would fold back the other side. So that is personal preference. There's not really a right and a wrong way to button it. So I hope this has been helpful for you in your sewing journey, and that you'll be able to give this a try, practice on a couple pieces, and soon you will be on your way to beautiful puckerless plackets.